This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem. Well, we know the Doctor doesn't like being told about the rules.
Never, ever tell me the rules!
That doesn't mean that there aren't any. Hey there, folks. Starting, if I have timed this correctly, tomorrow, we will be getting brand new episodes of Doctor Who Season 2, or Series 15, or Season 41, depending on how you want to count them. But we'll be getting brand new episodes with Ncuti Gatwa as the 15th Doctor. And there's something that I'm actually shocked I haven't talked about up to now. It's a time travel show. So what are the rules? Because time travel narratives have rules. They don't all have the same rules. There's actually a few different options to go with, but they've all got rules. And you might find yourself wondering whether you're a new person just being introduced to Doctor Who, or even if you've been watching for a little while, like, how does it actually work? Because it seems a little all over the place. Well, let's go over the rules. But before we can talk about Doctor Who specifically, let's talk about the standard sets of rules for time travel stories, because there's a few different ones. First up, we have the single immovable timeline. Now, you might think, well, if it's a single immovable timeline, why can you have time travel at all? Because the time travel was always part of the timeline. So this is what we see in things like 12 Monkeys, Time Crimes, Predestination, and the Robert Heinlein short stories based off of called All You Zombies, and the first Terminator film. This is where there is only one version of history, and when you go back in time, you can't change it, because when history happened, it already happened with you back in the past from having traveled forward. There's only one version of time, and you traveling backwards and forwards in it is part of the locked series of events. You aren't changing anything. You are just playing things out the way that they always have been. Now, this is something that we tend to see most often in one-off stories. You might notice the only thing that I listed there that really had any kind of follow-up or continuation was Terminator, but we'll circle back onto that one because Terminator actually had to alter what rule set it was using, because that first Terminator film is using single timeline. That's a pretty common one to use as kind of a twisty thing. Like the reveal that there's only one version of events is often a back-end revelation of how the time travel actually works. And you tend to not get too much built off the back of this stuff because, well, once you've established that, then it's basically all just fate. Nobody can change what's going to happen because it's always happened this way, will always happen this way, nothing you can do will change it. That works as a revelation, as a part of a single story, but trying to build more stories out of it can lend a sense of futility. What's the point? It only happens one way anyway. So if that's a version where nothing you do will ever change events, the other far extreme of that is the butterfly effect.
A butterfly can flap its wings in Peking, and in Central Park you get rain instead of sunshine.
The version that says literally anything you do, any alteration to past events will wildly change the present and future. This is what you get in movies like The Butterfly Effect, but also Sound of Thunder, which has a short story origin, which is, I think, the narrative origin of this idea. It might not be. It certainly is the popularization of this concept. This is also something that you actually don't see in practice very much, because whereas the single locked timeline version is kind of limiting in terms of telling any story other than the one that you're telling, the complete butterfly effect, where literally any change alters things in wildly different directions, is kind of too chaotic to work with. And pretty much any story that has that, the point of the story is going to be trying to get things back the way they were, or at least as close as possible after you've destroyed stuff, usually by accident. So it's frankly just too wild to try and build stuff off of, as opposed to the last one we talked about, which was a bit too rigid to build much off of. So those are our two far extremes, but we've got plenty of stuff that falls in the middle. Because in this nebulous gray area between those two extremes, we have, okay, you can change some stuff, but it probably doesn't matter all that much. This is where we find stuff like, say, Looper, or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. These things where you can change things, but it's really only going to impact a couple of immediate people. It's not going to reshape the entire nature of time and all of history as we know it. It's just going to alter some small things, but mostly stuff is going to stay the same. While Terminator 2 kind of tried to lean towards the idea of maybe Judgment Day was actually fully averted. If you look at the Terminator franchise as a whole, I'd say the franchise as a whole falls into this idea of, yeah, you can change some stuff, but ultimately not that much is going to be different. Only a couple of small things, and the overall shape of history stays the same because, while yeah, Terminator 2 ended on a note that maybe Judgment Day will never happen, everything else that came since then has been like, well, yeah, it did, but it happened later. The circumstances were a little different. The specifics varied, but like, yeah, no, it still happened. The way that I tend to think of this, because if you think of the butterfly effect as like the rock thrown into the pristine pond and the ripples go out and affect everything, this is a bit more like a rock thrown into a rushing river. Sure, it technically displaces some stuff, but the water's just going to flow around it. You're not going to reshape the river. It's not going to change the flow of anything. It's just going to work around this, and basically the river's going to be more or less unchanged. That's what we get here. As kind of a, I don't know if it's a subcategory of this or if it's an offshoot or if it's its own category, but there's a couple of occupants of what I'm going to call the no big rush to actually have the change settle in, but you can change it version. So what's in this weirdly named thing that I should have come up with a punchier way of describing? Well, this is where we find Back to the Future. Yeah, you can change stuff, but the timeline's kind of easygoing about it, and it's not really going to lock in the change right away. Legends of Tomorrow also did this same thing where, yeah, stuff would frequently happen that would break the timeline, but if our heroes could get things back more or less the way that they were before the breakage, things will pretty much work out from there. So that's kind of this weird, yeah, things change, but you got some leeway, you got a little bit of time, loosey-goosey kind of way of approaching it. Now, which rule set you're working with also has an impact on one of the big questions about any time travel story, especially if it involves going to the past, which is, what do we do about paradoxes? Now, if you're dealing with the single timeline version, the one we started with, the 12 Monkeys and the Terminator 1 version, well, that one either has no paradoxes or constant paradoxes that are baked in because they were always there. Kind of depends on how you look at it. Regardless, even if you consider those to be paradoxes in terms of where's the start and the end, I don't know, it's just kind of a looping circle, it doesn't break time regardless, because again, there's only one version of time and everything that happened is always what happened. So it's rigid, it's fixed. But when we start looking at the others, paradoxes are usually where things start to cause the biggest problems. And you can have everything from the Back to the Future version where a paradox could just be a matter of, well, I guess we need to erase somebody then because that's what'll sort this out. Or when things feel like going real big with it, sometimes a paradox will destroy all of space and time, or at least it's threatened to. It's hard to know sometimes if that would actually happen, because usually stories that deal in that the whole point is to prevent it, and the heroes do. Otherwise, obviously, all time and space is destroyed. But paradoxes are a bit of a sticking point in these things, and which set of rules will impact what way that gets handled. So there's a few different sets of rules to work with. So which rules does Doctor Who use? It kind of uses all of them. What rules are in play honestly tend to vary depending on who's writing it and what the function of the story is. I'll go through some examples to show you what I mean. When it comes to the butterfly effect, we have had it both fully negated and fully embraced, although interestingly, in both cases, as jokes, basically. It was pretty much disregarded and negated by the 12th Doctor in the story Thin Ice, where the Doctor's companion Bill expresses concern.
If I step on a butterfly, it could send ripples through time that mean that I'm not even born in the first place, and I could just disappear.
Definitely. I mean, that's what happened to Pete.
And the Doctor makes a joke about how, oh, you stepped on a butterfly and now your friend Pete, who's traveling with us, is completely gone and you don't remember him. It's a joke, obviously, and the Doctor points out,
Every choice I make in this moment, here and now, could change the whole future.
Exactly like every other day of your life. The only thing to do is to stop worrying about it.
basically embracing that sort of middle ground notion that says, yeah, you can change things, but time will be okay. Don't worry about it. On the flip side, more recently, in season 1, we had a gag where Ruby Sunday, his companion, stepped on a butterfly back in ancient times and suddenly was a completely different species for a hot moment before the Doctor was able to revive that butterfly, set things right, and then reactivate a switch in the TARDIS that apparently normally prevents this from happening.
The butterfly compensation switch.
In both cases, the butterfly effect is kind of treated as a joke. It seems to exist, potentially, but it's not something the show takes seriously. But it is also there. And we definitely know that the Doctor can change events. Can and has and will. Especially when you take into account that the Doctor is not from our place in time. Whereas for us, we don't worry too much about changing the future because that's just day-to-day life. Anything you do in your normal existence could potentially change the future. What we tend to worry about is changing the past, which will change our present. But since the Doctor is a time traveler and exists across space and time, basically everything's the present as far as he's concerned. So he can definitely change stuff, but also there appears to be some stuff that he can't. We get this notion brought up every now and then about this idea of fixed points in time. The notion that there are some things that must happen and some things that must never happen, and the rest you can kind of toy with.
Certain moments in time are fixed. Tiny, precious moments. Everything else is in flux. Anything can happen, but those certain moments, they have to stand.
Now, what makes something a fixed point in time? Basically, was it major enough to be noted in a history book? Seems to be the practical answer to that. But like within narrative, how do we know? Hold on to that, we'll come back to it. But it is juggling this mixed notion of, okay, yeah, we can change stuff, but there's some stuff we should not mess with.
This is me. What, you're in charge?
TARDIS Time Lord, yeah.
So it's almost like there's some stuff that is more fragile or more core to how things are meant to go, that messing with that, like, that's load bearing. Don't touch that. But the rest, like, yeah, it's fine. Redecorate. That'll be okay.
You've had this place redecorated, haven't you? Don't like it.
But even though the Doctor can change some stuff, there are also times where the fixed time loop, single time stream, everything always happened one way, also seems to be in effect. We've seen that, honestly, since way back in Classic. We saw that in stories like City of Death. And it's been in the revival era with stuff like Before the Flood, and most famously with Blink, which is a story that does not work any other way other than there is only one version of events, and these are always the things that have happened in them, and you can't really change them. But that's not how the Doctor always seems to operate. That's not how the show always operates, but it definitely is how it operates there. But let's circle back onto paradoxes, because I mentioned they're kind of a big deal. Now, in some of the stories that I've already named, like Blink, Before the Flood, City of Death, like those kind of have the paradoxes built in, which again, something we kind of already touched on. But what do we do when it's not doing that and we bring up paradoxes? Because the show does seem to treat paradoxes as a big deal when it's not doing the stories where the paradoxes are built in and they're part of the single flow of time. So for instance, the Master's plan at the end of Series 3 requires him to convert the TARDIS into a paradox machine to enable his plan to even work. Because what's going on in that one is he has actually recruited a far future descendant species of humanity to come back in time and help him conquer Earth. And when he has them start wiping out huge chunks of the human race, well, that's a massive paradox because this is the future of the human race destroying its own ancestors. That should maybe not necessarily wipe them all out, but that should definitely be taking chunks out of their own numbers as they destroy their own ancestors. Well, the paradox machine is there to ensure that that works out. And also, so there can be a deus ex machina that rolls the whole thing back so we just don't have consequences whatsoever. Russell T. Davies is kind of notorious for that kind of a resolution to his climactic stuff. But it does seem to require that this paradox, as opposed to some of the others that seem to be fine, is such a big deal. It requires a special machine to be sure that time doesn't break and it even works and is allowed to happen. Which of course begs the question, why is this one different than the times that we've seen that things just work out fine for the most part? Well, it could be a matter of scale. Given how far back the Toclafane are coming and how much damage they are doing, it could just be bigger than the other paradoxes that we've seen in stories where they are allowed to remain in place. Or the issue could be that it's a paradox inflicted on oneself with intent, because the Toclafane are coming back and deliberately killing their own ancestors. So maybe that's part of why this is necessary to have the paradox machine, because it can't happen otherwise. Although we also have had massive breakdowns in the flow of time without that much of an actual paradox, because there's the Series 1 episode with Christopher Eccleston, Father's Day. Now, in Father's Day, the Doctor's companion Rose prevents her own father's death, which happened when she was very, very young. And this apparently causes a breakage so massive that it brings about these creatures that are referred to as the Reapers, and they just proceed to try and destroy this now messed up version of time. It's basically the Langoliers, if you know that Stephen King story. But that never happens again. And it's not even that big a paradox. It's not like Rose did something that undid her own birth. She was already born. So how does suddenly now growing up with a father as opposed to without one, how does that cause this massive break compared to some of the other stuff that is allowed to just stand? Well, maybe the issue here is that it involved Rose and the Doctor crossing their own timeline, because we actually have them going ostensibly just to watch because Rose wants to try and be there when he is dying so that he doesn't die alone. But then when they come back again, when Rose didn't have the nerve to do anything, she then dashes out in full view of herself and the Doctor from a previous version of time, and that seems to be what throws everything out of whack. Except Doctor crosses his own timeline a lot. That's literally every single multi-Doctor story. And we've been getting those for ages now. Although, it is worth noting, most of the multi-Doctor stories usually have at least a throwaway line to the effect of, this shouldn't be happening.
Oh dear, we are in trouble, aren't we?
And in fact, when they were first introduced back in the classic era, they pretty much always had to be orchestrated by the Time Lords, who have a far higher degree of control over time and its outcomes than just the Doctor by himself does, or orchestrated by a villain using the technology of the Time Lords. So again, basically just the Time Lords. So this overall notion of the Doctor crossing their own timeline does seem to imply that it needs a steady hand and people like holding the foundation to be sure it doesn't get shaken up. So was the fact that that wasn't in place when Father's Day happened, was that the issue? Or might it be because it was the same incarnation of the Doctor crossing his own timeline? Is that maybe potentially even part of the purpose of regeneration? Because if you think about what regeneration does, why can't they just funnel it into regenerating and revitalizing the same cells? Why does it involve a full reset of the body? Well, maybe, potentially, one reason for that would be maybe having a whole new incarnation with a whole new physical body, a whole new appearance, a whole new form is almost like a soft reset of the timeline. Where now, okay, well, this incarnation can cross the timeline of a different incarnation, and that doesn't throw things off quite as much. It's still not supposed to happen, but that's not as big a deal. So maybe the problem in Father's Day was that he crossed his own timeline, and that was the issue. But you might be noticing I'm throwing out a lot of ifs, maybes, and a whole lot of stuff that feels like these rules can't all exist within the same place. They are contradictory and bashing against each other, and stuff is causing problems in one story where other stories, what is more or less the same damn thing, is not causing a problem. What is going on here? Well, I have good news for you. I can tie this all together. I can put it all together, make it all fit, smooth out the contradictions with one simple sentence. You don't need to understand it. The Doctor does. And that's enough.
I have seen you break any rule you want.
I know when I can, I know when I can't.
Think about it for a minute. This is kind of the whole point of the famous...
It's more like a big ball of wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah, that's a funny line, but the actual point of that is that how we understand time as people, this linearity point A to B, is just not how it works. And he doesn't even know how to describe it other than this vagueness of wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey. Because it's too complicated for us. We can't wrap our heads around it. The Doctor can. That's why the Doctor can identify when something is a fixed point in time. He just gets it.
Because that's how I see the universe. Every waking second I can see what is, what was, what could be, what must not.
The Doctor just knows how it works. They can look at a situation or a person or an event and just know either through instinct intrinsically or just because they understand the mechanics to a degree that we never will. This is fixed, that's not. So why do we need to know? The Doctor knows. That's all that matters. As long as the Doctor can make sense of it, the story still works. Oh, but that doesn't gel with that, and this should be the same thing. It's different. No, don't worry about it. The Doctor doesn't fully explain all the rules of time travel to the companions. The Doctor explains the rules of time travel for each story as it comes up, because those are the rules in play for that story. Why are they different this time from other times? How does the Doctor know they're different from other times? He just does. He knows how this works. We don't have to. The companions cannot comprehend the fullness of everything that he knows and is aware of and knows what can and can't be done. It doesn't fit in their heads. Why would it fit in ours as the audience? The companions oftentimes are the surrogate for the audience, and the companions don't know all of it. They might understand some things. They might not understand how it usually works. They might understand how it's working right now. But the companions are the ones who know everything. The Doctor is. We're not supposed to be as smart as the Doctor. The Doctor is supposed to know and understand stuff that we don't and can't. So why would it make sense to us? Why would it all fit together? Why would it lack contradictions? It exists at a level of complexity our brains do not process. And that's okay. In fact, personally, I think that's amazing. And as a ultimate logistical step out of the internal logic of the thing, as a franchise, that was the best thing they could do. The less rigid rules they are, the more freedom there is. And if you are going to be so loose as to have, in some stories, very rigid rules, in some ones, very loose rules, but it just all gets summed up as, the Doctor understands. Don't worry about it. That frees you up to tell pretty much any story you want to tell. And for me, at least, that's the true magic of Doctor Who. Always has been. Even within its own genre of time travel narrative, it doesn't have to follow the single set of rules that every other time travel narrative has had to lock itself into. Even the loosest ones, like I mentioned, Legends of Tomorrow, very loose rules, it still sticks to them once it establishes them. Doctor Who? Nah, whatever, man. Different set of rules for this story than last one. Oh, but how does that work? Don't worry about it. The Doctor understands. That's enough. And that certainly works for me. And I hope it works for you. And I hope you had fun with this. Ultimately, my answer to the question, how does time travel work in Doctor Who, is to go, don't worry about it. Yeah, that is ultimately what I'm saying, but I had fun saying it. Like, weirdly, I've been thinking about talking about the mechanics of different rule sets for time travel. I've been thinking about doing a video on this for ages, but for some reason it never occurred to me to wrap that conversation around talking about Doctor Who before now. So once it occurred to me, I had to take the opportunity to do this. This is too much fun. I love this stuff. And like, I don't have a problem with the rigid rules. I like a lot of those rigid rules when they can stick to them, but Doctor Who shouldn't have them. Does that mean it's contradictory and doesn't make sense? No. Makes sense to the character that matters. And that's how it gets away with it. What are your thoughts about time travel stories in general? Do you have a preferred set of rules, broadly speaking? Are you comfortable with the fact that Doctor Who pretty much has all and none of them at the same time, or does that frustrate you? Obviously, I love it, but my opinion is not the only one out there. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments, and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills if you want to help me out with that. It enables me to actually do this as my living. Like, share, and subscribe. YouTube stuff. You know that. But don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lopfula, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Blahuvian, Adam RDL Taylor, Pal Barabajagal, Mary Mello, Mira G, Sir Didymus is my favorite. I've never screwed that one up before. Well, if you want to hear me mess up your name, check out the rewards on the Patreon. I'm going to blame you.